Hey guys, it's Richard here, and I want to talk to you a little bit about activity versus accomplishment. A lot of people, I find, think that just by doing something, they're accomplishing or reaching their goal. With credit card debt, we see a lot of people that come into our program that believe that just by making minimum monthly payments or throwing some money at the credit card companies when they can afford to do so is accomplishing something for them. And there's a big difference, a huge difference actually. And let me explain why. Credit card companies, they want you in debt. They make a lot of money off it. Like, let's be honest here. It's very profitable for them. And we live in a time, here we are, November 2013, where unemployment still exists at a pretty significant level. You hear about companies laying people off and folding up, and this constant story about this housing bubble that's going to pop all the time. And we've got credit card companies that are reporting record freaking profits, like not even a good quarter, but record profits. Like, they haven't even hit these numbers ever before. I saw a quarterly report very recently that talked about a credit card company that did something like $20 billion in profit in that quarter. And I'm not even talking about, revenue, cash flow. I'm talking about profit. After they paid off their expenses, that's what they had left over. That is an obscene amount of money. Let me just put it in perspective. I'm 40 years old, and if I were to just quit my job and not do anything, and somebody gave me $20 billion, I'd have a really, really hard time spending that over my lifetime. It would be next to impossible. So here we are operating in a place where people get these credit card statements from companies that on the bottom there's that little stub. Back in the old days, you'd cut a check and mail it in and make your payment. But these stubs still exist, and they have, your late payment date and how much your balance is and what your minimum payment is. And then below that, there's always an empty box with a decimal point, and they want you to put the dollar amount that you're paying. It's basically like an open invitation to pay whatever you want. And I think it's funny because there's not a lot of umph to it. Like, it doesn't have anything behind it encouraging you to pay off the full amount. In fact, they're happy with you just making the minimum payment and carrying a balance because it's really, really profitable. They make a lot of money off it. If they can get you in a cycle where you're carrying a balance every month and they're charging you interest, and the interest isn't cheap. If you think they're making these record profits off the cheap mortgage rates, you're mistaken. They're making the profits off unsecured products where the interest rate's high, where people have defaulted. In Canada right now, we have record levels of debt. You see it reported all the time. We actually have a greater debt load per capita versus the US. And it's not getting any better, it's getting worse. People are carrying more and more unsecured debt. So they think that just by the activity of throwing a payment at a credit card company to keep them happy is accomplishing something. It really isn't. People got to wake up. They're on this endless cycle. I'm going to call it a merry-go-round because they're going round and round. It's a merry-go-round of debt. Like, let's be honest here. You're going around in circles, throwing a payment here and there at your credit card companies, thinking that something's accomplished, and it's not. A few years ago, the government implemented some new legislation that forced credit card companies to disclose, to create some transparency and to disclose the true cost of credit card debt. And all it did was it created in very small font a small disclosure that said if you just make your minimum payments, it'll take you this long to get out of debt. And I've seen statements that say anywhere up to 120 years if you just make the minimums, to 30 or 40 years. But it doesn't tell you the total cost. It just tells you the time frame. So people think that the activity of making a payment is accomplishing something. And I guess one could argue if you're getting out of debt in 30 years it is, or 100 years it is. But the reality is, it's bullshit. It's not doing anything significant to get you out of debt. It's keeping you in a cycle where you're in debt and you're owing money. So the problem I have with this new disclosure the credit card companies have put on there is it's invisible. most people don't even notice it. You know, in contrast, let's use cigarette packages, because about 50% of the package on a cigarette is dedicated to disclosing the health risk to smoking. You're going to die, your teeth are going to look like this, your lungs are going to look awful, so on and so forth. But there's not a lot of transparency on credit card statements letting you know what the financial risk is to just making your minimum monthly payments. It doesn't tell you it's going to cost you, you know, 4 or 5 times what you owe right now. If you owe $20,000 and let's say it might take you 35 or 40 years to pay it off if you're being generous, making the minimums, it doesn't tell you, hey, it's going to cost you, you know, 4 or 5 times what you owe today to pay it off. And I'm not even going to get into, you know, cash advances or universal default. You know, people get charged interest from day one on cash advances on credit cards. And if you start becoming a higher risk to default on your debt, credit card companies can increase your interest rate on the balances that you're carrying. So I've seen them go from 19% to 23, 25%. It's insanity. You got to stop it. You know, if you think that you're accomplishing something by the activity of making a payment here and there, or just paying your minimums, you got to wake up, open your eyes. You know, this merry-go-round that you're going around and around and around in circles, it's endless. And it's actually very, very simple to modify that, to change it. And I'm going to tell you what it is right now. It's as simple as getting off the merry-go-round. It really is. Get off the merry-go-round and change something, because what you're doing isn't working. If you're not seeing your balances come down, if you're constantly carrying a credit card balance, being charged fees and interest and everything, you've got to change that. The activity is not working. You are not accomplishing anything. If you're totally insolvent, meaning you owe way more than what you own in assets, then talking to a bankruptcy trustee is probably a good idea. If you're not insolvent, if you've got the capacity and cash flow and you've got income, then take a look at debt settlement. You know, Total Debt Freedom has saved Canadians a considerable amount of money with their debt settlement program, and it does work. We're one of the top rated companies with an A rating on the BBB. So go do something. I don't care what it is. Stop doing what you're doing, because if it's not getting you out of debt, the activity is accomplishing you zip, zero, zilch. Go change the behavior and do something different. That's my rant for today. Never confuse activity with accomplishment.